This incident happened many years ago when I went on a trip with my friends to a rural area. My name is Sam, and my friends' names are Peter and John. We decided to visit a place that was once a cemetery. Over time, people had built houses over it, fully aware that it used to be a burial ground. Despite this knowledge, they lived there. One night, all the residents mysteriously died, and since then the area has been abandoned, and no one goes there. Peter told us about this place a few days ago, and we decided to visit it. Although Peter initially tried to dissuade us, he eventually agreed to join us due to our insistence. The place was about 30 miles from our homes, and we set out on our journey, reaching there at night. The place had an eerie vibe, and it felt unsettling just looking at it. Peter suggested that we should go back, but John laughed it off, telling Peter not to be scared since we were all together. Shortly after arriving, John suddenly complained of stomach pain and said he needed to use the restroom. Peter suggested he hold it until we found a more suitable place, but John didn't listen and went into a dilapidated shack nearby. We waited by our bikes for John to return. 6 minutes passed and John hadn't come out. I suggested to Peter that we should check on him. We called out for John, but there was no response. When we opened the door of the shack, John was nowhere to be found, although his belongings were still there. We were stunned and began searching for him, calling out his name. We heard footsteps coming from inside the shack, but there was no one there. Just then, we noticed another small shack nearby suddenly catching fire, and the sound of footsteps grew louder. This scared us immensely. Peter reminded me that he had warned us against coming here, but now John was missing. Peter suggested leaving and coming back in the morning to search for John, but I insisted on finding him right then. I told Peter he could leave if he was scared, but I would stay. Eventually, Peter joined me in searching for John. As we moved a bit further, we heard John's voice. We looked everywhere but couldn't see him. His voice seemed to be coming from all directions, echoing around us. Suddenly, Peter claimed he saw John and ran towards him. I called out to Peter, telling him to stop as there was no one there. Peter stopped abruptly and John's voice ceased altogether. Peter looked at me and suddenly his body caught fire. Something began to pull him into the ground. In an instant, Peter, burning, was dragged underground. Terrified, I ran towards my bike, but something grabbed my leg and started pulling me under. As I tried to see what was pulling me, I heard John's voice calling my name. He came running and pulled me out just in time. John said, "Let's get out of here fast, or we'll be dead by morning." We both ran for our lives and finally made it back home. I asked John, "You went to the shack to use the toilet, but took a long time, so we went to check on you." "What happened?" John replied. "Sam, have you gone mad? I was right there the whole time. Suddenly, both of you disappeared. I didn't understand what was happening. I shouted for you, but couldn't find you." The next day, John and I returned to look for Peter. I told John what I had seen, how Peter had caught fire and been pulled into the ground. John was even more frightened. We asked around and learned that anyone who goes there never comes back alive. The place is haunted by spirits that don't let anyone leave alive, We were lucky to have escaped. We asked the locals for help in finding Peter. They accompanied us to the spot where I had seen Peter pulled underground. After digging about 6 to 8 feet, we found Peter's burnt body. John and I cried our hearts out, mourning the loss of our good friend. Second story. My name is Nathan, and I am 32 years old. This story dates back to when I was 10. My mom was very ill, and the doctor advised that she needed to stay in a peaceful place surrounded by nature to recover from her allergies. My dad didn't have enough money to buy a farmhouse or a second home, so he sold our house in the city and bought a lovely villa a little distance away in a pollution-free area. We were happy to move, but within 2 days, we were bored. There were no other houses nearby, and I had no friends there. Back in the city, I had many friends, but here I was alone and bored all day. The first week or 10 days went well for my mom, but then she started feeling uneasy. She told my dad that she felt like someone was always with her, watching her. My mom told my dad that she felt something was out to harm her. She was afraid. When my dad heard this, he laughed and said, "We used to live among many people, and now we're isolated. That's why you feel this way, but there's nothing to worry about." However, my mom couldn't shake off her fear, especially when she was alone at home while I was at school and Dad was at work. She was always afraid someone might attack her. Dad tried to reassure her, saying, "Once you're completely well, we'll sell this house and move back." But my mom remained very scared. I remember one evening around 5:30 p.m. when I came home from school and found my mom sitting at the dining table crying. Her skin was red, as if she had an allergic reaction. I asked her what was wrong, but she seemed lost and couldn't speak coherently. After asking her several times, she finally said, "Son, I don't think I'll live much longer." Hearing this, I started crying and felt awful. I asked her what she wanted, and she said, "Let's sell this house and move back. I feel suffocated here. It always feels like something bad is going to happen." I tried to comfort her, but I was still a child and didn't know what to do. I waited for my dad to come home from work. Around 7:30 or 8 p.m., when he arrived, I insisted we move back, telling him that Mom felt lonely and scared, and if she got sick, there would be no one to take her to the hospital. Dad listened and said, "Okay, we'll leave this house soon." I wasn't sure if he was serious about selling the house or just trying to calm me down. But another 10 to 15 days passed like this. One day, Dad came home exhausted from work. I asked if we were leaving soon, and he said we might not be able to leave this house. I asked why, and he replied, "There's a mysterious story behind this house, but it's not something I can tell you. Go to bed now." After that, I saw both my mom and Dad very stressed. About a week or 10 days later, I woke up around 1 a.m. and saw my mom lying on the floor in the hall, not on the bed. My dad was holding her feet, trying to comfort her. I couldn't understand what was happening. I asked Dad if Mom was okay, and he had tears in his eyes. I was scared, not knowing if she was alive or dead. Dad told me she was fine and asked me to go back to bed. In the morning, a spiritual healer visited our house. As soon as he entered, he said, "This house is cursed. It's not just one spirit, but many that haunt it. Leave this place As soon as possible, I overheard everything. Dad told the healer that no one wanted to buy the house despite their best efforts. The healer performed some rituals and said, "I put a protection spell on this house. Now everyone inside will be safe." However, even he didn't know how powerful the spirits were. That night, while we were sleeping, I heard the sound of dishes breaking and falling in the kitchen. When I went to the living room, I saw large nails hammered into the walls, and blood was dripping from those walls. I looked up at the ceiling, which was supposed to be white, but it was completely blackened as if someone had deliberately done this. The most bizarre and shocking thing was that my dad wasn't in the house. I didn't know where he had gone. I looked at my mom, who was unconscious on her bed, but Dad was nowhere to be seen. I shouted for him, "Dad, where are you?" But there was no response. I was too scared to go outside, so I kept searching inside the house. After a while, I saw Dad standing outside, motioning for me to come out. I wanted to run to him, but something inside me told me not to. That night felt endless and terrifying. A few minutes later, my mom, who had been unconscious, came out to the hall crying. She took me to her bedroom and made me lie down beside her. The next morning, we found Dad severely injured, lying in our yard. Dad needed almost 2 months of medical treatment. We left that house the same day we found Dad in that condition and went to live with my grandma. What happened to that house afterward? Whether Dad sold it or what he did, I don't know, but slowly everything went back to normal. Third story. My name is Rick, and in 2016 I was working at a diamond company. In New York, the building had 4 floors, and the 4th floor was always closed. I lived on the 2nd floor, and the 1st and 2nd floors were where we worked. My shifts were at night. I had only been working there for 2 days when, after finishing my night shift, I went to my room to sleep in the afternoon. There was always a cot in my room, so I laid down and fell into a deep sleep. After a while, I felt like someone was waking me up, telling me to go downstairs to sleep. I didn't pay much attention, but then I felt a hard slap. When I woke up, I saw an old woman standing next to me. I immediately got off the cot and went to work. One of my colleagues, Mike, who had been working there for many years, asked me, "Did the old lady hit you?" I was new and didn't know much about the company, and I didn't speak much of the local language. Mike, who spoke the local dialect, said to me, "Don't stay alone." Next day, I went upstairs and said, "Who else is here?" My roommate wasn't visible either. They told me there was a guy, but he was on vacation. After that, I forgot about it, and I had been there for a month when the staff asked me if I was scared. I said, "Scared of what?" They replied that I probably didn't know much about the place. I asked, "What don't I know?" I honestly had no idea. They told me that 5 people had died in the building, 2 of whom were murdered. I thought they were joking since I was alone on the 3rd floor at night. One day, while cleaning my room and laying out my bed, I started wondering if their stories were true or if they were just messing with me. I jokingly said to myself, "If there's a ghost here, make your presence known. This is all a lie and there's no one else here." That was my biggest mistake. Immediately, I felt like someone had lain down next to me. My skin crawled and, even though it was cold, I broke into a sweat. When I looked beside me, no one was there, but it felt like a body was lying next to me. I couldn't figure out what was happening. Then I heard a voice from below, and I jumped up to see my friend Jake calling me to dinner. He noticed something was wrong when he saw me, but I just said nothing was happening and ended the conversation. After that night, my sleep became terrible. Every time I slept, I had the same dream of a very beautiful girl with my friends who would say, "Look how beautiful this girl is. Show us if you can be friends with her." I'd go to the girl and ask if she would be my friend. She would say, "Think carefully. If you become my friend, you'll never leave me." I agreed and took her hand to show my friends, but then they started running away. When I ran after them to ask what was wrong, they told me to look behind me. When I turned around, the beautiful girl had turned into a horrifying witch with a severed leg, blood pouring out, and one of her eyes hanging out of her face. I was frozen with fear. And then she spoke in a terrifying voice. "I already told you I'd never leave you. Now you'll stay with me forever." This nightmare became a daily occurrence, and I'd wake up suddenly. One day, after waking up and getting ready, I went downstairs and Jake asked me if I was feeling okay. I said yes. "Why?" he asked. "You look really pale, like you have a blood deficiency." I hadn't noticed until he mentioned it. He told me to get checked at the hospital, suspecting I might have jaundice. The next day, after finishing my work, I went to the hospital. The doctor said I didn't have jaundice, but did have a significant blood deficiency. He suggested a blood test. When the results came back, my hemoglobin was only at 8, whereas the normal range is 10 to 12. I didn't pay much attention, but the doctor gave me some iron tablets and asked me to retest in 3 days. After 3 days, my hemoglobin had dropped to 7. The doctor said I needed to be admitted. I told my sister and brother-in-law, and they admitted me to the hospital. Luckily, they live in the same city. My brother-in-law, Mark, sat with me and asked how I got so sick. I told him I didn't know, that my health had just been deteriorating for days. The doctors were also puzzled. My sister, Emma, called our mom and explained everything. Mom visited a local healer who was known to be clairvoyant. After hearing my mom's story, the healer immediately said I needed to be brought home as soon as possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't survive. She said I had very little time left. My mom called Emma, and Mark insisted on discharging me, even though the doctor warned that my condition was critical. Despite the risks, Mark got train tickets, and they sent me back to my hometown the next day. When I arrived, they took me to the healer's house. I was barely conscious and had no idea what was happening. The healer performed a seance and summoned the spirit. She asked why the spirit was tormenting me. Through me, the spirit responded he chose me. I didn't choose him. He wanted to know me, and now he's mine forever. I will take him with me. The healer retorted that the spirit couldn't do that. The spirit laughed and said, "Do your best. No one can stop me from taking him." Hearing this, my mom began to cry loudly. The healer, now angry, sprinkled some blessed water on my face, and I passed out. When I woke up, I had a black thread tied around my wrist. The healer instructed my mom not to remove it until the next full moon. She also asked for a black chicken to be brought to her on the full moon for a ritual. My mom did everything the healer asked, After the ritual, the healer warned the spirit to never come near me again. She then called me over and explained that in a world where God exists, so do evil spirits. We should never underestimate either. Since then, I've never joked about such things or even thought about them.